9 out of 10 startups fail. Women and minority-led companies receive less than 10% of all venture capital. This is an environment designed for failure. Startup Hype Man's mission is to use the power of story to make success inevitable, not the exception. And this podcast is designed for entrepreneurs to share lessons learned from their stories so that you can figure out what whatever it takes means for your company to make it. Let's kick it.
Like your childhood or something like that?
Yeah, a very traumatizing one.
From the Hype HQ recording studio in Chicago, Illinois, it's Startup Hype Man, the podcast. I am your host and the Startup Hype Man, Raj Nation. Every week we bring you real talk and unpack the behind-the-curtain strategies with the entrepreneurs who are doing it or who have been there, done that, all to help your startup grow up and stand out. Join the Hype Nation and catch every new episode, plus get resources and other stuff that actually help you, not the whack promotional junk that other companies try to shove down your throat. All you have to do is add your email at startuphypeman.com. Ready for some real talk? Time now for me, Raj Nation, to turn it over to, well, me, Raj Nation, for this week's conversation.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Startup Hype Man podcast. Today on the show, we welcome Emmanuel Straschnov. Emmanuel is the founder of Bubble, a company that actually lets you build web and mobile applications without having to know a single line of code. So my best way to describe it would almost be like Squarespace, but for designing any web or mobile application. Emmanuel's company, Bubble, founded Bubble.is, has amassed 230,000 users with 10,000 monthly active users and an annual recurring revenue of $1.6 million. And he's done all of this by raising no capital, a completely bootstrapped venture. Emmanuel, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, I'm super excited to talk to you, especially given how much you've accomplished thus far. And I think our listeners are going to get a lot out of this conversation as well, because our topic today is how do you get customers to fund development? Now, why is this on your mind? Why is this important to you?
Well, it is important because it's very much at the core of how we did this with Bubble. Not raising any money. And more than that, I think it actually had a very positive impact in how we shape both the campaign and the product. And I can't say for sure, but had we raised money much earlier and had we not tried to fund our development through customer payments, like basically customers giving us money for our service, we probably would have gone out of business way earlier than that. And that actually happened to a few of our competitors. Now, no-code tools are much more popular than they were when we started 6 years ago. But when we started 6 years ago, we were not the only ones. There were 2 or 3 other teams that did things much more traditionally from a Silicon Valley standpoint, going to Y Combinator, raise millions. And all of them so far, what I've seen, have shut down after a while because, we'll get into this in a second, I'm sure. But when you raise money, you don't necessarily try to have a product that sells itself early enough. And then at the end of your runway, when you have to raise another round, if investors don't like the metrics you're showing, then you're in trouble. But I'm sure we'll get into this.
We definitely will. And I think that's a great topic or way we can dive in further into that topic. Before we do all that, let's learn a little bit more about you. So you are of Russian origin, but born in Paris,
Right.
studying computer science and mathematics in college. You ended up getting an MBA from Harvard. So obviously you have a pretty well-esteemed educational background, but growing up in Paris. Now I consider Paris, and I'm an American, but I consider Paris like the land of art and culture and people philosophizing or sharing philosophy. So you have this more math science background. What's it like growing up in Paris? And
Actually, I did not grow up in Paris. I grew up in the countryside. I was born in Paris, but then I moved when I was 2 till 18. So I grew up surrounded by farms in Normandy, northwest of France.
Okay. Thank you for correcting me there. So growing up in France in the countryside, how do you get into computers?
Well, actually, because when you're in the countryside, you don't have too much to do. And so my parents got me a computer when I was 15. I'm 35, so it was before the web. It was when we were still using MS-DOS and Windows for people, our audience that is a little bit older. And so I had nothing else to do pretty much, when it's raining on a Thursday night in November surrounded by farms, you have to keep yourself busy. Normandy tends to be pretty rainy, and so computer science was, I wouldn't say computer science, but programming was actually something great to do then. I
Yeah.
did two things basically when I was in, and that you would actually see on my resume. I learned Chinese, and I did a lot of programming. Learning Chinese was a family thing because my parents met in Beijing 40 years ago, even though they're both French, like Caucasian French. So they had no Chinese origin whatsoever, but they were both interested in China. I lived in China 40 years ago. And so I learned Chinese and computers and played a lot on computer and did a lot of programming because, in the countryside, you don't have that much to do. Had I been in Paris, it probably would have been different.
Yeah. So you get that first computer. Do you remember what were the first things you were doing on the computer? Were you playing games? Were you already starting to code yourself?
I was never a very big gamer, actually. So it was more like programming fairly serious things. So I remember I was 12. I was trying to make a little bit of money selling. Actually, it was inspired by what our English teacher. So we speak French over there. So we had an English teacher, programming something so that we would learn English words. It would keep asking us, what the English words were until you got them right to help us learn. And there was something running on MS-DOS. And so I ended up doing something fairly similar for German, and I ended up selling that to my classmates for $5 or something, a floppy disk, which was pretty cool. So I did game a little bit play video games with my brother, but not too much. I was more into doing internal things. You could call me boring, I guess.
It's funny you mentioned,
but I was making money, so that was actually
right. Yeah, that's the plus side of it. It's funny you mentioned the floppy disk, right? The actual floppy, the big ones, right? I remember.
No, those were the 3-inch.
Oh, you're talking about the smaller ones.
The smaller ones, yeah.
So they were actually like hard disk, but they were still called floppy disks.
Yeah.
I remember the original floppy disks. I remember once we had gotten to a point in technology evolution that they were obsolete. So that was around pretty quick after growing up. But in seventh grade, I remember one of my friends just still had a crate of them in his basement. And this was AOL 4.0 was out at this point. So it's not like they were being used at all, but we went from using those floppy disks, several years prior as actual learning software to then using them as discs we were flinging at each other in the basement to play ninja battles with each other. So it's funny to think of just how quickly technology changes and, and just how things you were cherished so heavily became obsolete so quickly.
Well, it's exactly what we're trying to do with computer coding languages, so.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of leads me to that's really what Bubble is about, is it's trying to make at least something obsolete. So,
yep.
And again, for everyone listening, the purpose or the existence of Bubble is it is a visual programming language for web and mobile applications. And the goal is make coding obsolete. So you can build applications on Bubble without typing any code. It's a point-and-click editor. So just like you may be used to doing, I would say not even WordPress, because WordPress requires a good deal of understanding of the back end to be able to do it well.
Right.
More like maybe a Squarespace, though. How did you even get into Bubble? And if you could maybe even talk about is Harvard part of that journey in making Bubble, or where does the coding start to where you're you know what, coding doesn't matter anymore?
Very, very much so, but in an indirect way. So So after college, I moved to China and did management consulting for a few years. So very far from technology. And then I wanted to do finance. And so that's why I got my MBA at Harvard. And during my MBA, I realized finance was not for me. And so I tried a whole bunch of things. I even ended up interning in fashion. Don't ask me why. So I
did see you were the special assistant to the CEO of Prada. Wait, we have to talk about that for a second. How?
I was his chief of staff. I was doing his personal consulting job for 3 months. I was between my 2 years of business school, and that was great. I had an amazing time, but it was still not my thing.
Yeah.
And so where Harvard came in actually is because at the end of school, I graduated without a job, fairly certain at that time that I wanted to go back to programming and technology, actually through fashion, because what happened is that during my second year, I started working on a startup idea in the fashion space, but that would be digital, of course, because today, that's a modern medium, is either an app or a website. And I started working with someone technical at the time because I was not technical anymore. I was very far from coding. And I realized I was working with this girl. I was working with a girl from MIT. I realized working with her that I actually didn't care much about the luxury products, but I was much more interested in the product that we would show on the digital screen. So basically the web app or the mobile app. And so I realized, okay, let's give up this fashion thing, which was fun for 3 months, but that's it. And let's go back to more traditional and I would say real software. Not saying that other things are not real software, but software for the sake of software, which is something like Bubble. It's a pure software. It's not an e-commerce website. And where Harvard came in is that so I graduated without a job, and I got introduced to this guy that actually had that idea of Bubble before me and was looking for a business co-founder. And so I was in business school. He was Harvard College 5 years earlier. And so we had mutual friends from the Harvard community, some alums. Basically, someone that went to college with him to Harvard College went to business school with me 5 years later. And then so someone made the connection. It's actually interesting because I had an expiring offer from a software company in New York the day I met him. I mean, it was expiring the following day. So we actually decided to partner on our first meeting. Because I was like, well, if we want to try something, it's going to be now or never. Turns out that's what so Josh is my business partner. So at that time, the company was not called Bubble, nor it was incorporated, but the idea was already there. But we named it incorporated together. I think he wrote the first line of code maybe in January 2012, and I joined him in June. But that's what he called his double mistake. So he was looking for a business co-founder because he thought the business was ready, the product was ready to get some early users and traction, which was completely wrong. But the second mistake he made is to see in me a business person, because it turned out I'm a much more of a product and a technology person than a business person. I mean, I had a great time at Harvard, but it's not necessarily what I like doing. And so those two mistakes basically canceled each other. And 6 years later, we still work together. So
let's dive into, we have the understanding of how Bubble got started. We have the understanding of at least top line what Bubble is. Now, again, I mentioned in your introduction, Bubble's at 230,000 total users or accounts, 10,000 active users monthly, and annual revenue of 1.6 million, which is, these are no small feats whatsoever. Sort of the key is that all of this has been a bootstrapped venture. So our topic is, how do you get customers to fund development? When we introduced it a few minutes back, you mentioned how taking on investment would have probably killed the company a few years ago. Can you, let's expand upon that now. Really, what do you mean by that?
So it's actually something I formalized a little bit because since we've been doing this for 6 years, we've been revisiting every 6 months, 9 months, whether we should stop bootstrapping and raise money. And so the important thing that in my mind, when you decide whether you're going to take external money from investors, is are the interests and the incentives of investors very well aligned with the ones of your users? And turned out in technology, and that's where the VC industry works, it works pretty well. For instance, if you're Airbnb or Facebook and you take investors' money, well, investors are going to want as many users as possible. On Facebook, you're going to want as many friends as possible because you want to find your friends. If you're trying to sell or to buy or Airbnb, you want as many sellers and as many buyers, and investors want the same thing. So it works pretty well. For what we do, it actually doesn't. And what I mean by that is, especially early on, by definition, what we're doing is fairly limited compared to writing code, because it takes some time to get to something that's very flexible without writing code. That took us, in my mind, about 4 years to get to something where really I could say, yes, you can build a lot of things without. Before that, it was a little bit embarrassing to answer that question. And the problem you have with investors is that investors are going to want as many users as possible. That's pretty much anything
as quickly as possible.
As quickly as possible. That's pretty much what they're going to care about, because they're not going to play with you. I mean, no offense to investors out there, but they're not going to spend too much time on the product. If you tell them, yeah, you know what, we worked very hard on the product, is much better than before, but they don't see charts, going up exponentially, they're not going to be happy. On the other hand, though, existing users, like users that are already, most of our users build companies on Bubble. So instead of hiring a technical co-founder, they launch a startup using Bubble. So we are extremely important to them. They don't necessarily want us to have a lot of users. They want the product to work extremely well and be fast and not bug-free and be able to do anything they want without writing code. And so you actually have a pretty big conflict here, because you cannot do both. Early on, you have to be very focused. And so it was something that we decided with Josh, with my business partners for the first few years, to basically not aggressively try to onboard new users. I mean, we would have some I think for some time we're 50 new users a day. So it's okay. It's not gigantic, but it's fine. We're not trying aggressively to have more. On the other hand, we were very committed to make sure that the experience of people that would be on the platform and would already trust it, that their experience would go extremely well, because we wanted to prove our thesis that you can do things without code. Because now that we have something that works, people say, oh yeah, it's possible. But believe me, 6 years ago, people were telling us it was impossible to do that. Engineers were like, you need a technical person. You're going to generate crappy software that's not going to be good. So we needed to prove our thesis, and we needed to have strong success stories, which we ended up having. Now we have 3 of our users went to Y Combinator. Another one raised $360 million. So it's real businesses that don't have engineers. But it took us about 5 years or 6 years to get there. And so we decided to focus very early on those users that were already on the platform. And in that sense, it's much better to actually find users that pay you, because then back to the original theme, about funding your development to customers, because you make sure you work for them and that you don't work for investors. Again, if both investors and users want the same thing, great. If they don't, think about it twice, because it's a little bit dangerous.
So with that said, it's okay, it's great to have the people who are using the platform paying for the product, right? Now, in the case of Bubble, I totally see that if it's, say, a service-based business or a managed service of some kind, where a customer is signing $100,000 or $500,000 contract, right? There's big quantities of money coming in one swath. Now, Bubble's pricing is ranging from $62 a month to $445 or $500 a month. So you got to get a lot of people on the platform, right?
Right. But so that's the trick a little bit, is that early on, we had special deals with a few customers that for whom the platform was extremely important. So to be transparent, we found one startup, the startup that I just mentioned, that raised $360 million. Well, at that time, they hadn't raised that much, but at that time, they had raised, I think, something like 4 or 5 million. They had no engineer. It was very hard. It was a fintech startup, so it was not necessarily easy for them to hire engineers in San Francisco, and they needed to have a second version of their platform. The V1 was not something they could expand on, and they were basically fucked. I mean, they had big problems. So we told them, we're not going to build the app for you, because that's what we do, but we make sure that we'll do what's humanly possible for Bubble to be good enough for what we're trying to do. And for this, you're going to pay us $10K a month. So $10K a month, is not $500,000 a year, but it's $120K a year, so it's not bad, and that basically pays for the life of 2 guys, and that was our lives.
Yeah,
because we didn't have employees. So that's, you have to be flexible at the beginning. Yeah, I mean, today I would not do that because you need to reach a certain scale. I mean, today we are client funded, but because we have thousands of paying customers. But back then, I think we had something 50 to 100, but one of them was representing 80% of our revenue.
So early on, you're doing a combination of product and service to get.
That's the interesting thing in our case, and I don't want to say it's something that is easily replicable by other people, because I don't know if it is. But it was never a service, in the sense that we never did work just for them. We were just making sure the platform would have the functionality they need. So effectively, because it was still very early on for us, I would say 80 to 90% of what we did for them was useful for everyone. And by the way, we never pushed code only for one customer. We had a very clear deal that the IP would be ours and that would be made available to everyone. Yeah. And it's actually a deal, something we did. So with them, we had a retainer because they had enough money and they wanted to make sure that we would not tell them, oh, sorry, we're too busy this month, we cannot do that. But we also had ad hoc one-time deals with other customers, where it happened sometime that a guy emailed me and said, I have an investor meeting next week. I really need to be able to record sound on the web app built on Bubble. Can you add that feature? And I said, yes, I can do that this week, but it's going to be $5K. And the guy was like, sure, because, at some point that was important. So great thing of doing that is that you get your customers to invest in the platform, because once someone has paid $5,000, not to take something and go home, but just to make the platform better so that it's better for him, it increases his trust in the system.
They're not going to leave. Yeah.
Invest more. I mean, once you paid, financed a little bit the development of the product for a feature that you care about, well, firstly, that if you have another need that will come, you can probably talk to the founding team to get it. And also, why would you leave something that you invested on?
Yeah. And so I just want to sort of recap what you just said there, because I think it's really insightful and important. you were basically fielding existing user inquiries and saying, and what they said, hey, we need this. You said, okay, I can build that, not just for you. I can build that for the entire platform. And because it's coming on your special request, it's going to cost this much money to push that update out, in the next X days or months or weeks. So not only are they getting what they want, right? Specifically, they're getting the feature they want, but everyone else is also getting that feature. And there's a decent chance they may also need that at some point. And on top of that, I think there's a little emotional pull here too, because you're saying, or if they're paying $5,000 to add that feature, they kind of have in their head, hey, this platform that a lot of people are using, it has sound because of me, right? I'm the one who asked for that.
Yeah, I mean, and so because community is a very big thing, that's another great thing of not raising money, because you have to do things in a cheap way. And for us, because I was handling personally most of customer support tickets myself and I couldn't do it, I started this forum that is now a very big asset for us where our users talk to each other. So when we don't do sponsored features too much anymore, because now we're pretty happy with the core and we have a plugin system so that people can add features themselves. But back then I would, give a shout out to the guy that invested, that paid for that. And, you would get a lot of likes, because it's a forum, right? You have likes, and those things actually matter when you're part of a community. When people say thank you, this is actually something important. One thing we've even done, even though that was not working extremely well from some reasons, we can get into it, is crowdfunding. I actually thought about crowdfunding some features. So at some point I had built something on Bubble, like a simple web app where people could vote. And then I would email all the people that voted for a specific feature and say, hey, do you want to chip in $100 or something? Effectively, from a operational standpoint, it was quite a pain to do that because I had to collect funds one by one. And that was not working extremely well. And also, the good thing with only dealing with one person is you make sure that actually that will fit exactly his needs. That's what you get. If you pay $5K, we push a feature for everyone. But if there is a small thing that you actually need, for instance, for the sound recording feature that I was talking about, if you need to do pause and unpause, well, you're going to tell me that, and I'm going to build that right away. If I have 50 people that pay for something, I'm not exactly sure it's going to work for everyone, and that's going to lead to unhappiness.
Yep. And I think in your version of the crowdfunding model, which we're not talking like going on CrowdRise or CrowdVest or Republic. We're talking about like going to your forum saying, hey, who wants this feature? Click yes. And then everyone who clicks yes, you're emailing them one by one, say, hey, can you pay $100? Not only is it probably a pain because it's very manual, but at the same time, there's a big difference between someone saying they would like to see a new feature and actually paying for that feature, right? If it's just like, yeah, that seems like a good idea. Yeah, I'll give it a thumbs up.
Well, it's actually something that I wanted to say in general. With the great thing about finding paying customers very early on is that you're sure they actually like what you do and that they're willing to pay for it, even though it's limited. I think one of the biggest problems with friends when you start a company is that they want to be supportive. So they're going to tell you what you're doing is great.
Right.
But the next question should be, okay, then give me your credit card and let's actually put you on the plan and, you're going to pay $50 a month. And then they're like, you know what? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
and then basically what that tells you is that when people say your idea is cool, that probably means it's not a good idea for a business. You want people that say, oh, you already have something that is hardworking. I needed okay, put me on it. I'm willing to pay for it right now.
Yep.
And that's actually what we found. I mean, for the first 3 years, we probably, had like 50 paying customers, but we knew that if we were to stop serving them, if we shut down the platform, basically, the business would die. So they were like extremely engaged. They were on Bubble, 15 hours a day, literally. It was very early on. So we had a lot of, we needed to adjust the interface and everything. I was on Skype with some of them literally every day, talking to, what was working, what was not working. And they were not like, oh, yes, it's a cool idea. It was like, I know it's buggy, it's slow, because at the beginning, the platform was really not great. It was not pretty, had a lot of limitations, but they had no other option. So, they really wanted to use it, even though it was a crappy product. And that's the kind of people you need to find. And the problem, again, once going back to raising money, when you raise money, you get a lot of cash very quickly, without necessarily doing the work to try to find these people. And once you find these people, that doesn't necessarily mean you're on $1 billion idea, because maybe it turns out that, you did find the 10 people in the United States that actually want your product, and you have 100 total across the country, and that's not going to help you. But there is a pretty strong chance that once you have those few tens of people that are super excited about your product that you found by hand, then the product gets better, the need that you identified as a problem, because initially you saw a need as an entrepreneur, is going to get more widespread, and then those 10 or 100 people are going to become millions, and that's why you build a very successful company.
Yes,
but you need to do that first step, because if you don't do that first with a few people to make sure they actually would pay for it, you might just do something cool that all your friends say is cool, but that no one really needs.
Right. And you obviously don't want to be in that situation. So you said at first you can get a few people to pay for it. Earlier, a few minutes back, you mentioned that at this point now with, enough users, you're not doing like the one-off services for cash anymore. You're just going off the subscription revenue, right?
Right.
At what point, I guess for our listeners, how many users did you get to where you said, okay, we don't need to keep doing the one-off, like high cash services. Now we just are building subscription platform or revenue?
So we didn't think about it in those terms. We actually stopped doing it because we didn't have the bandwidth to do it. We just had, a usual stream of small things that you don't charge people for, because I don't charge people for fixing bugs. I don't charge people for the platform to be faster. I charge people, for instance, to have a record sound element on the page. So we didn't think in terms of number of users. Now, thinking back, I think it was not a matter of number of users. We stopped doing cash deals when we started making more than 20K a month. Basically, because 20K a month meant, like if I charge a feature, because 5K is on the high end of what I would charge, usually it would be more between 2 and 4. That means, 2,000 out of 10, 20 is great, but it's not transformative. When we were much below that, when we're making like, 10K or, 7K a month, and then you add another 3 or 4, well, that actually makes a very big difference for the business. That pays for, let's be practical, it pays for the co-working space for the next 6 months.
Right.
When you start a business, that's what matters, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why we were doing this, but we stopped that at 20K just because the return was not that high. And after that, it became also, you have to be very careful with that communication. I think today, if I charge people to add a feature, they'd be like, wait, you're an established business, they can see the activity we have. Why would you do this? Is it a one-person shop? And we're
right.
not. Now we have a team. So now when people want features, we don't tell them we're going to build them right away, but we try to do our best. But we have a team of engineers that build them.
Yeah.
Back then, it was just the 2 of us. So it was and people knew that. They knew I was a founder. I was directly interacting with them. So it was much easier to do that. Today, I don't think that would go well with our community anymore.
And how many people is the team now, the Bubble team?
10 people.
Awesome. Is it co-founders, the rest is engineers, or are there other roles as well?
We have like my co-founder and I. We do everything, but we're still mostly technical. Then we have 5 engineers, 2 customer support people, which is customer support for us being way more complicated than just making sure your credit card charges go through or refunds. It's really like, going in the user app, making sure that you understand what they're doing and helping them figuring out how to do things more efficiently. And I have 1 business operation person and 1 documentation person.
Yeah. Great. I've got one more question here for you. So when we look at the users of Bubble, who would you say is your target customer? Because you've got on like the website, like, hey, is this a hobby? Is this a personal project? Are you part of a team? Is this part of a company? Who are you targeting with this platform?
So that's interesting because it's not really it's a persona in terms of needs, not necessarily a persona in terms of demographics. We're targeting people that need to build software and custom software and that don't have either the technical resources or the financial resources to do so. And that can be found in a lot of different places. So where we started was with young business school graduates or college graduates wanted to start companies, non-technical people, because those people, actually, it's a word I didn't pronounce earlier when I said you need to find paying customers. Those people were desperate, desperate to find technical. And it is very important. I mean, when you're building a business, you want to find desperate people to use your product. And that's when I was saying, you need someone that is really ready to pay a crappy product is because it's desperate. And our first customers were desperate. They needed to find engineers. We're in New York City. It's impossible to find. And even if you find them, it's going to be $150,000. So it's really way too much. So they were desperate. They had no other option. It was either us or offshore outsourcing in Romania or India, which doesn't necessarily go well either, for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
So we started historically with a lot of, non-technical founders. So that's one type of people that uses us a lot. But now slowly it's moving more into, again, people that need to build custom software. That can be like, a small business owner, instead of paying, $30,000 or $40,000 a local development shop to have a new system to manage his inventory or invoicing system or whatever that is. If he cannot find a SaaS product off the shelf, well, he's going to build it himself, or usually have a young analyst, because it's usually something where you put a young graduate that joined the company on Bubble to build it himself. So we have that. And there's a third use case we have, and that's where the personal thing and the hobby thing comes in, is that it turns out you have a lot of people out there that like building things a little bit for the sake of building things, that were not necessarily able to do it before because they didn't start coding young enough, and it's a pain to catch up on. And so they build local projects for themselves. One example that we had one day was someone built an advent calendar, had the tradition to do that with his girlfriend. Every year they would offer each other an advent calendar, before Christmas. Every day you have a gift behind the thing. And one day he forgot. One year he forgot. And so he built one on Bubble where, you would click and that was opening the thing, and the girl was very happy. We didn't make money out of that because, that's done on a hobby plan. Sure. But this is actually exactly what Bubble is for. It's like, empowering people to do things, whether it's at home or at the office, with the idea that people that do that at the office, we basically pay for the people that do that at home. That's a freemium model. You have more paying customers that let other people use it for free. I mean, I don't want to charge someone to use for an advent calendar, but I don't think it's a less meaningful use of the product than someone that raised $360 million. We just need to have the right pricing to get more money from someone that raised $360 million versus a teenager that does that for his girlfriend. But so back to who uses us is really people that need to build custom things that didn't start coding. And that can be, we even have like larger corporations like Fortune 500 companies. We have some teams that, get pushed by the IT too often because it takes too long or it's too expensive. And they're like, you know what, let's just build ourselves this. We don't have technical talent, but now we have a tool that lets us do that without it.
Yeah. So a couple notes I have just coming off of what you just said there is, and I want to call back to an episode that we recorded last year with a man named Josh Carter. He's the current CEO of Patriot Bootcamp. And he spoke all about his experience having launched and then having to shut down a startup, and how really it was around, they weren't clear on who their target audience was. And I'm always an advocate for like, be clear on who your target market is. Don't try and be too many things to too many different people. You won't know where to go. But this is even though you're saying it's kind of a quote unquote for everyone platform, even within that, the two things that are important to understand for everyone listening is the first people you went to were those business school grads. Like you had at least a core starter group. And then as you expanded, there's a common, even though the people may have different jobs, different use cases, there's still a common need. And that's sort of like that desperation aspect we talked about. They need to build something.
Exactly. There is a common need, and they go to the same places online. And that is very important for us. So they read the same blogs, they read the same posts, which is for us very important. It's actually business schools came the second wave when we did our beta at Harvard. But before that, we would go to tech meetups in New York, actually, like tech meetups, tech co-founder meetups, where everybody goes to try to find a tech guy, and you only have one tech guy for like 9 business people looking for an engineer. And we went to a few of them and said, look, we cannot be your CTO, but we have something that can let you start without a CTO. And that's how we found them. And those communities are very powerful. When you start a business, ideally you need to find that. If you don't have that, it's going to be very challenging.
Yeah, and it's right. You're going to specific places to find the people. You're not just shouting out of the gate, hey, anybody come use us, please. It's a specific approach. And so this strategy or this mindset around the market and who's the users, this is what's called, I first heard this term from Devin McDonald, who's the VC partner at a VC firm called OpenView Partners or OpenView Ventures out of, I think, Boston. And they said they tend to invest in what they call horizontal companies. So, for example, they invest in Calendly, which for everyone who's listening, you probably know what Calendly is, but Calendly has many different types of users. It's not just, hey, we are going after Fortune 100 executives who do this. I use Calendly. A Fortune 100 exec use Calendly. Emmanuel, you may also use Calendly. There are a lot of different types of people who use Calendly, but the need is the same in that we struggle with trying to figure out scheduling back and forth. We just need an easy way to get a meeting scheduled. So that's what you've got here is like the horizontal market where there are people who look different, have different jobs, different roles, but the need is there. They need to build something and do it relatively quickly.
Yep.
Before we wrap up, can you let our listeners know where they can find Bubble, where they can learn more, and where they can get in touch with you?
Sure. Well, so if you Google Bubble, actually, we should be the first thing that comes out. But if not, it's Bubble.is.
Which is impressive. Because Bubble can mean a lot of things.
Yes, I'm pretty happy about that. Or if you type Bubble Visual Programming, then you're definitely sure to find us at the top. And the best way to reach out is probably to email contact@bubble.is. The team is small enough that if someone mentions that they heard me talk on this podcast, I would probably get that email. Like our support team will flag that and that will come back to me. So that's probably the best way. Yep.
Awesome. Now to wrap up, we'll close how we close out every show, which is coming to sort of our final answer to the topic question for today based on our discussion. So I'll go first, then I'll toss it to you to close out, Emmanuel. Our topic today was how do you get customers to fund development? So the key things that I took away from this were early on, figure out who needs more out of the product more or less, or let them come to you and build for them, but charge for that on top of it. Don't just do it for free. Or this isn't a route you took, but I've seen other companies do this. Have some type of like add-on consulting service that pairs with the product where you can get, that $5,000, $10,000 invoice you can send out to them, where it's like, it's technology, but there's like a management fee on top of it, or like maybe a kickstart fee or some type of consulting going on with it that allows you to get in, more capital up front. Emmanuel, how do you get customers to fund your development?
Identify who needs your product, find pockets of desperate people, and resist the temptation to take outside money from investors, because as soon as you start having money from investors, you're not going to do that work because it's very hard at first to find those customers. On the flip side, though, once you have them, it actually makes your life much easier because you don't have any conflict to manage. You just need to make your customers happy, and that's the best thing you can do as a business owner. So just go for it.
Emmanuel Straschnov, thank you so much for joining us today. It was my pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you very much. It was great.
That brings us to a close. Did you like what you heard? Did it tingle your earbuds? Support your startup ecosystem and share this episode with another founder to help them. If you don't have anyone in mind, then leave a rating and review of the show on iTunes so more entrepreneurs can learn about it. And if you want more, head to startuphypeman.com and click on the knowledge section to get a bonus blog post written by this week's guest where they unpack the topic even more. Remember to subscribe to the show on iTunes or Spotify or Google Play or wherever else you listen to podcasts. Startup Hype Man is more than a podcast. In fact, we support startups across the United States and globally develop sales and marketing acumen with messaging that stands out to customers and stands apart from competitors. Learn more and fill out a form at startuphypeman.com if you want to chat. Shout out to this week's guests for spending their time with us, and shout out to music artist Sir the Baptist for providing our show's theme song. Catch you next time. Hype Man out. Word up. Raise up.
Got you howling at the moon, yeah. This a dance with the devil, girl. Instead of sundown too, yeah. This a dance with the devil, girl. Tell me what you gonna do, yeah. This a dance with the devil, girl. And if you can't get it loose, then fall into the truth. It got you howling at the moon, yeah. This a dance with the devil, girl. Instead of sundown, yeah. This a dance with the devil, girl. Tell me what you gonna do, yeah. This a dance with the devil, girl. And if you can't get it loose, then
it's a dance with the devil.